Hello all. Thanks so much for coming today. I believe that we have Sammy and Annie here in the room. Feel free to say hello. And we're still waiting for our other presenter, Alyssa, but I will begin my little introduction, and then we can kick off our first session, first of so many sessions today. This is Humanities Talk number 5, and we're here at the 5th Symposium of Rising Scholars offered by Polygence. The goal of the symposium is to celebrate and publicize the hard work of our student scholars who have all been working tirelessly over the past months. For this panel, we have a roster of really two amazing students, Alyssa Truong from Gretchen Whitney High School and Sammy Baek from Naperville North High School. In the room today with us is our panel judge, Annie Trin, who will be scoring each student's presentation along with myself. Annie holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Kansas, where her thesis consisted of short stories centered on the Vietnamese diaspora. As a mentor, she engages with students who share a love for words and who wish to experiment with narrative. And for my part, I'm trained as an art historian and curator, having earned my PhD in the history of art and architecture from Stanford, with a dissertation on photography and polar expeditions. We're really excited for these talks. If you have questions, please type them into the chat for any speaker. We'll hope to have some time at the end. Given that we only have 2 speakers, I actually think we could have quite a robust question and answer session, as well as conversation among the panelists and the 2 of us. So with that, I would love to invite Sammy to the main stage to present. Sammy, how are you?
Hi, George. How are you? I'm doing great.
Great. Whenever you're ready, you can feel free to share your screen, and I'll just let you take it away.
All right, thank you. Here, share. So I hope everyone can see my screen okay. And first of all, thank you everyone so much for being here. My presentation will be focusing on Korea's colonial past and legacy. And often overlooked fact of Korean history is that Korea was occupied by Japan for about 35 years. And in that time, atrocities were committed against the Korean people. And yet, although these atrocities are remembered in Korea, Japan seems to have forgotten them, or at least not have taken them into account. And it is really this issue that Koreans feel that merits proper compensation and that merits further action to properly leave the past behind. The years preceding the Korean annexation into Japan, the Japanese colonization of Korea, were marked by Japanese military expansion. Japan fought 2 wars on Korean soil, both of which were designed to increase its influence and to eliminate rival powers which were attempting to bring Korea into their own sphere of influence, be it the Qing Chinese or the Imperial Russians. And it was through these moves, through the victories that Japan incurred, that Japan was able to deprive Koreans of their self-government, that they were able to annex Korea into their own country in 1910. Now, there were Korean attempts to reclaim sovereignty, the most important of which would be the Battle of Namdaemun by the Korean Imperial Army. And although this attempt failed, it was nevertheless one of long attempts, of a long history of attempts to reclaim that sovereignty, to wrest Korea from the control of foreign powers. The actual occupation of Korea can be divided into 2 stages with regard to the damage that was inflicted. The first of which will be the physical damage. Protesters fighting for their independence in 1919 were shot and killed, and their homes were burnt down in 1919. a most flagrant example of that will be the village of Cheonri. Koreans were also forced to work in poor conditions to fuel the Japanese war effort, especially in the waning years of the Second World War and the Second Sino-Japanese War. To the right, you'll see a map of just how intricate and just how large scale this operation of Korean forced labor was. Koreans were also forced to partake in illegal human experimentation. Japanese leaders of Unit 731 were responsible for conducting trials on Koreans and many other ethnic minorities without their consent. Koreans were also forced to become sexual slaves for the Imperial Japanese Army, to serve the soldiers at their pleasure. And on the right, you can see their joy at being liberated by Allied forces in 1945. But the basic definition of an atrocity extends far more than simply a physical atrocity. No, in the years in which Korea was occupied by Japan, when Japan had free reign over the education and the lifestyle of Koreans, Koreans were forced to abandon their identity and to shed their culture. Koreans could not speak their own language in public, more or less publish in their own language. They could not use their own Korean names and were forced to change their names to Japanese ones. They were forced to recite the Pledge of Imperial Subjects at every public event, which outlined their subservience to the Japanese emperor. And they were supposed to bow every day at the start of each school day in respect and in subservience to the emperor. And you can see just how much Korea had changed over the years, how Japanized Korea had become in a way, and how that the Korean culture had been destroyed. But thankfully for the Koreans, independence came in 1945, but that was not the end of the story. Many Allied nations who have been deprived of their own self-government could seek monetary compensation through the Treaty of San Francisco. But Korea wasn't eligible because of ideological differences that determined that over which Korea were to be represented at the Treaty of San Francisco between the US and the Soviet Union. And so Korea, especially South Korea, was left to figure this issue of compensation out for itself. And the truth is, for many Korean victims who wanted compensation, the Treaty of Basic Relations between the two countries in 1965 but was not enough for them. Because this treaty that restored diplomatic relations and allowed Japan to give economic aid that was sorely needed to Korea meant that the Korean government could no longer push for any further compensation, and that the money that was given to Korea had to be used for the good of the nation as a whole. And so many Koreans and many victims have felt bitter that they were not given what was needed, that they were left behind. And now they feel that they deserve more, especially given Japan's what would be characterized as historically revisionist attitudes. And many Koreans were characterized as attitudes as unrepentant. They are indignant at Japanese leaders going to pay tribute to the war dead of Japan's modern wars at Yasukuni Shrine, which is a Shinto shrine in Tokyo. They are aghast when Japanese leaders display no sense of cultural insensitivity at all. And when they pose for photo ops on trainer jets that read 731, which, as you'll remember, was the unit responsible for conducting illegal human experimentation as part of the Imperial Japanese Army. And they are additionally dissatisfied by Japanese organizations and leaders' attempts to remove statues representing comfort women who were the actual names of sexual slaves who were forced to serve the Imperial Japanese Army. The men and women of Korea are not satisfied. They believe they deserve more, because of what is going on in Japan, because the leadership has not yet acknowledged, has not yet come up to what they believe is necessary. And as long as this continues, then Koreans will continue to hold on to their past. Even as the last covered woman victim dies, even as the last person who was forced to leave for Japan dies, they will still never forget. And ultimately, with the atrocities that have been committed, with the cultural genocide, and with the lack of proper compensation, Koreans will continue to push for that proper compensation. And it will only be until that arrives in which Koreans will be able to let go of their past and the two countries will be able to come to a firm and solid and indefinite reconciliation. Thank you.
Sammy, thank you so much for this very powerful talk. I'd love to begin the question and answer by asking you what the process of research for this was like. It's clearly very personally meaningful things for you, and I imagine you may have ancestors or family members who were directly victims of these sort of historical trauma that have occurred. How did you approach it, and what was your, what sort of struggles with the research did you encounter? How did you decide to sort of translate those historical revelations into the presentation?
So first I should say that when I came into like the project, the Polygence research project, I kind of expected to be researching on something entirely different, but I did end up like thanks to the help of my mentor, I ended up utilizing a lot of different resources that really opened my eyes up, I guess, to a lot more diverse perspectives and issues. As part of my wider Polygence project, I wanted to see the Japanese perspective in all of this. And so I really began to dig into like books. I think, for example, John Dower's Embracing Defeat, for example, was one of them. And they were really helpful, especially ones that my mentor gave me, in that they were able to like point out this perspective very well and approach it from a very all-encompassing perspective. And you're right. This is a story that's very personal to me. Like as a Korean, I feel very strongly, have very strong opinions about this issue. And I really try to tell the raw human story as much as possible, by really looking out and looking through Korean newspapers and news sources to really find stories that tell the raw story, not just the numbers, but also just the emotions. Really trying to tell, I guess, the fury of the entire nation over what has been done in the past, what has been done in the present.
Thank you for that. Let me see if there are any other questions. I certainly have others myself that I would love to ask. Q&A. If anyone has a question, please feel free to post it. The other question that I was really interested, because it's very, there's a lot of more recent, so to speak, contemporary history that you're alluding to, especially with leaders who don't seem to grasp the gravity and severity of some of the images or references. I thought, the Japanese prime minister sitting in that plane reading 731 was a great example of someone who might be oblivious to the meaning behind those kinds of, embedded symbols. Are there, in the spirit of sort of trying to turn a new page and looking for that reconciliation, are there examples of sort of post-colonial gestures from other countries or cultures across the world that you think are good examples of how to move forward to atone for the past as best can be done? It'll never be complete, obviously, but to find those sorts of olive branches that allow people to meet on common ground here and now.
Certainly. So I believe it was last year in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests that were not just happening in the United States but also across the world. The king of Belgium, I think, came out and he apologized for the role his ancestor King Leopold II played in the genocide that occurred in the Belgian Congo. This was a period where, from around the 19th century to about the early 20th century, where the Congo natives were forced to labor for rubber, and if they could not meet a certain quota, they were had their limbs amputated or they were killed. And so we're talking about like genocide on an unimaginable scale. And to the people that survived that, it's really hard to forgive, right? It's hard to like try to see the goodness in men. But I think the current king of Belgium coming out and saying, we're sorry, we cannot like try to turn back time, but the best we can do is that we can be apologetic for it, and that we can turn a new leaf and try to make sure that things become better in the future. I think that was a great move, and that's a move that I think a lot of the current Japanese leaders aren't really seen to be, getting the memo on, so to speak.
Great. Thank you for that, Sammy. I hope that there will be an occasion, because as I mentioned, we have two presenters in our session today that will be able to bring everyone together for further talks. But I hope that the rest of the attendees can join me in a round of applause for Sammy and his presentation. A very poignant and important study that you've undertaken, Sammy. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to invite Alyssa to step up to the virtual dais. Alyssa, what you will do is ask to present, and then I can invite you to step onto the main stage here.
Oh, hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. And you?
Good, good. Why don't I let you jump right into it, Alyssa? Would you like to share your screen?
Yes, I'm getting onto that. Wow. Does this look okay?
It does. Go ahead and go full screen. Beautiful.
Okay.
Take it away. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Are you ready to take a field trip? Then let's go. Imagine you're walking in a typical American store, any of your choice. Now look at the snack aisles, especially ones with crunchy snacks. Can you find some of your favorite ethnic snacks outside of the specialty ones? How about ones that are healthy as they are unique? Well, these thoughts drove my project on food production. Interested in business and a big foodie myself, I decided to combine them into creating a new snack with the help of my mentor, Ashton Yoon, a food scientist and crunchy product specialist who is also well-versed in business and design. But going back to crunchy snacks, you'll find many are full of carbs, sugar, and sodium, and don't offer many nutrients and minerals that healthier alternatives could offer. Plus, interesting flavors that pop out might not necessarily authentically represent the cultures they stand for. We need something that will appease our appetites, satisfy our desire, satiate our thirst for crunch, spread the love of another culture's ingredients, and benefit our health. But before moving on, I wanted to give you a quick introduction to Asian culture representation. From just 20,000 or 2000 to 2015, the Asian population skyrocketed and their cuisine started to seep into America. Now, most of us will probably recognize Asian-influenced dishes like teriyaki, sushi, and fried rice. And believe it or not, egg rolls and jackfruit used to be considered novel. Now, as an Asian American, I'm still always finding new things. In a single trip to an Asian market, I already found flavors I never knew existed. Do you recognize some of these chip flavors like chestnut or cucumber? Okay, so now after a short look at how Asia influenced a lot of the food we know today, what do I bring to the table? I propose a crispy, savory taro and mung bean cracker, topped with chickpeas and coconut for those savory, nutty flavors without the actual nuts, and other seasonings commonly used in Asian-influenced dishes. I currently am working with 2 flavors, popcorn chicken and coconut chickpea curry. Even better, it's beyond the flavor. I'm using different ingredients like rice flour to make these crackers gluten-free, high in fiber and protein, more filling, and able to offer antioxidants and benefits like digestive health and regulating blood sugar. And here are the benefits. But what makes my crackers different from other competitors? Well, there are dehydrated taro roots being sold by brands like Terra and many attempts at crunchy taro snacks in different Asian stores. Yet I haven't seen mung bean ones yet. There's also Thin Addictives, which flavors its biscotti through toppings, but their versions, either sweet or with nuts, aren't allergen friendly. Third, there's Dang Foods, specializing in Thai flavors, while I plan to start with Chinese. I'm taking a step further by mixing a new creation, using taro and mung bean powders that I dehydrate and grind myself. And instead of frying with loads of oil or using chemicals, I've been getting quite acquainted with my air fryer. Now, I wanted to share about the process. At first, I put together ideas and went straight into experimenting with ingredients, but Ashton and I decided to go back to customer discovery before trying again. With Ashton's food science notes and multiple resources, I started interviewing people of ages 10 to 50, and I learned the packaging visuals really matter. Many prefer bite-sized snacks of rounder, less sharp shapes, and this was the time I learned that some were looking for new flavors, transparency, health benefits, and cultural representation. So where did my target markets land? I'm aiming to create a pleasant surprise for the Asian community, adventurous foodies, savory and crunchy enthusiasts, and those who love snacking but are trying to find healthier options. Diving more into the process, I've been keeping my work in Google Drive, Sheets, Docs, and Slides. Making at least 20 batches by now, I switched from sweet to savory and soft to crunchy before finally landing on crunchy crackers I was able to achieve. Here's what I have now. I'm currently working on the next steps of sending out a sensory evaluation survey for people to try my snack and send some feedback, and that will help shape what I do next. But I'm also working on a design and packaging for the crackers and plan to learn more about the marketing. Now, I know this is a long process and I'm not quite there as an amateur and person just exploring food production, but in just a couple months, I've learned a lot. What did I learn then? Well, I learned how to make nutrition tables and calculate moisture content, about the properties of taro, the different textures that eggs and different flours can create, and more. Of course, I did hit obstacles with limited resources, constant restocking, and acquiring new ingredients as I developed the snack. And especially, the biggest one was working with a mentor across the nation on a project all about food. But thankfully, I still get by with my friends and family that support the process and are my little guinea pigs who help me taste things. So after days of brainstorming, researching, and experimenting, I've definitely had a very fun hands-on experience and want to take it further after the project ends, starting to sell locally and eventually launch this snack to greater heights. Thank you. Okay.
Alyssa, thanks so much for that presentation. I definitely have some questions for you. And as I posted in the chat, people can feel free to ask their questions, post questions for both Sammy and Alyssa, either directly in the chat or in the Q&A tab up at the right. But Alyssa, your project is somewhat special to me because I actually was the one who interviewed Ashton in order for her to come on and become a mentor, and really enjoyed her own developed snack, which are called garbanzos. They're like a chickpea, aerosolized chickpea, chocolate-covered, delicious, crunchy thing. And so I can really see how some of your conversations with her probably opened up different possibilities for what is happening today in food science and then also in sort of healthy snack creation. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how you overcame the challenge, as you described it, of talking about food and doing this very sort of personal flavor-based experiment with someone across the country. How did you sort of overcome that obstacle? Were there terms that you agreed on, or a vocabulary, a grading system? Just really curious to hear how those conversations went.
Right. So the way that I approached this problem was I had a Google Drive full of pictures and videos that I would upload every single time I made something, or when I visited the store, I found really cool flavors and I'd take a picture and I'd show it to her. And so if I wanted to tell her the texture, then I would record maybe my parents eating the snack and then giving their comments. Or I would pick up the cracker and I would crack it in front of the camera so you can see how hard the crispiness is. And so with things like that, it was much easier than saying this tasted dry or this tasted like foam. Like, it's not really that easy to describe the textures. And so the videos definitely helped.
That's great. Hearing you describe all of the different processes too, I think in many ways, there are so many wonderful connections with the kind of sort of national or ethnic identity behind the project that you did and behind the project that Sammy did. And I would love to, after one or two more questions for you, directly invite Sammy back up to sort of talk about things as a group. But I'm also curious to know, as a humanities student, what it's like to incorporate all of these other things. So you're working with a food scientist, you're thinking about marketing. I know you've done your own, designed your own cookbooks and things like that. So there's this very technical side, there's a sort of business side. It's all very entrepreneurial. How do you balance those sorts of things in your mind? Do you envision this as being a very hybrid product and project? Or is it, do you feel like you sort of live in a food science place or in an entrepreneurship place, and then you pick and choose different influences or different approaches as you need them?
Well, I really would like to pick those different influences. Like, I also started a podcast called Palette of Possibilities. And in that, I just talk about whatever I'm curious about. And maybe other people might be wondering about the same things, or maybe they're hearing something new. And so kind of like that, and with cooking or with baking, I love experimenting with ingredients and seeing exactly what I can do when I make mistakes. It could turn out really great. And so I wanted to start with like the Chinese influence right now, and then eventually push out and then possibly try other cuisines, because in my home, my parents and I were very open to all types of dishes, from like Mediterranean, Indian, and so on. And so because of all this openness, it just makes me feel like there's just so many possibilities.
That's great to hear. My family does the same thing. You can tell by my last name, I have a French background. So I come from those sorts of old world combinations of flavors. But my wife's side of the family lived in Japan for a long time. And so we cook a lot of food with Japanese influence. And I love when things sort of those happy combinations of styles or of flavors that come together in really unique ways that you've been describing. There's a great question from Jennifer here. And I think it's a really interesting sort of technical question. So how do you get the flavor to adhere to the chip? On Food Network shows, I see participants quick freeze ingredients and pulverize them. Would that work with herbs, or would that destroy the flavor?
Wow. So because I have limited resources, I didn't exactly learn about like the pulverizing and such, but what I did was I tried putting the seasoning inside. But of course, when you put seasonings and spices inside a chip or a biscuit and so on, you need a lot more of proportions to get that flavor out. And so what Ashton and I tried to do was we actually put the seasoning on top of the chip. So after I bake it, then I season it. And then if you use herbs, though, those are very strong flavors. So even if you put it inside the biscuit, you probably don't need too much of it. And what I learned was that you only need about 1.5 tablespoons at the most of any seasonings or herbs, because you don't want to go overboard. Then it's just probably going to get too strong.
That is so interesting. I'm sure that herbs really, when they're applied in that dried way, really intensify the flavor. So I can envision it being a very delicate process, knowing what's too much and what's not enough, that sort of thing. Fine-tuning that must be a real, both challenging and fun part of the job. Let me invite Sammy back up, because I would love to hear both of you talk a little bit more about your mentors, and the sort of ideas that they opened up to you, new approaches or new directions for your research. So why don't we let Alyssa go first, and then Sammy can jump in afterwards, okay?
Okay, so I guess to talk a little bit more about my mentor. So I definitely asked her a lot about her experiences with producing the garbanzos with her team. And then she also had a bunch of college notes. And then I also found different articles on the different ingredients that I was using or that I wanted to use. And then after that, for future steps, I was planning to take this locally first because I wanted to get out my sensory evaluation survey, which would then get that feedback so I can possibly find out what I need to fine tune. And then after that, I would see, okay, is this ready to sell locally? And then eventually I want to take this where I can make multiple versions where there comes in the different cultures, the different ingredients of others, and then possibly get them out into more than just the specialized Asian markets, but into ones where it's sitting among the American ones too.
That's great. I also remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Alyssa, that even though Ashton is on the other side of the country because you're in California, right?
Right.
Ashton actually went to your high school. You two are,
yes,
you're from the same town, is that right?
Yep, and sometimes we talk about that too.
What an amazing small world situation. I remember we were all so happily surprised when we discovered that. That's a really cool sort of connection across space and time that happens at places like Polygence. So just really fun to note that. Sammy, do you want to tell us about your mentor and how the work sort of progressed, and what you think you want to, if it helped you to sort of guide your path towards a new topic, or what you want to study after high school?
Yeah, sure. So my mentor, I think, really helped me a lot. Right from the get-go, like we really didn't end up like focusing on a topic that both of us like we want to get to know more about, and also that we were both interested in. I was coming from the Korean perspective on the Japanese colonization in Korea, but my mentor Jonathan, having like studied abroad in Japan and like really being knowledgeable about the Japanese side of things, like we could really, I guess, kind of be foils to each other in a way. Like we could like complement each other, and so I think I really like that. Even just in our discussions, I could ask him a question, he can just answer it right away in like a really insightful way that answered a lot of my questions. And even like all the resources that he provided for me, like books, like articles, like all these PDFs, that really helped to illustrate like the Japanese perspective. Like that was really helpful. I actually found myself relying on a lot of them. So yeah, actually, me and Jonathan, like we lived on the opposite ends of the country too. Like I live in the Midwest, and he's down in California. But thankfully, I don't think that we like hindered us a lot, and I'm glad it didn't. We really kind of end up like helping each other a lot, and really like being there for each other, and really helping each other to get through this project together. And I think really working with Jonathan has been a tremendous blessing, and I think that's ultimately helping to reinforce kind of like my desires to like study history in college. So and I really did appreciate being able to open up to new perspectives with them and getting to know more about those.
That's great. One of the other real challenges I know from having gone through many academic and research style projects is knowing when to wrap things up. That's one of the big challenges that a lot of people face with their PhDs or when they're writing books. So where are you guys in your projects now? Do you feel like you're at a place where you can sort of put a bow on it? Alyssa, is it more like, is this the sort of the first stage in the big project for you? Sammy, is this something that you want to expand, or do you feel like you've done this research and you can sort of file it for future projects going forward?
Okay, so I guess I'll answer this one first. But I would say that, of course, yeah, this is more of a first stage, and I haven't finished the project yet, so I'm still working on it with Ashton. We have a couple more sessions, and then I also want to, or I hope to stay in contact with her because we're also planning to do a podcast episode sometime in the future. So it's just very fun connections that we make each session. So I'm really glad that she's just so open with everything and very energetic. I love her personality. And so with all of that, this is really, I hope will, sorry for the grammar, but I hope this will keep going into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for my project, I'm technically done. I mean, there's things that I have to wrap up that have been haven't really been able to do so just because of schoolwork and college applications and then etc. We're all busy, right? But yeah, like this. So I kind of designed my project in the form of like blog posts because I ultimately want to translate them onto a blog that I was thinking of writing, and that's going along pretty well. And when all things are complete and when it's kind of fully published, I really do hope that the blog serves as kind of like a comprehensive overview of the colonization in Korea, and really just as a hub where people can come in and get their questions answered about this kind of dark period, I guess, and to really connect that back to our contemporary history, and to really gain a wider perspective, I think. So.
That's excellent to hear. It's I love the idea of designing them as blogs. One of the things that happens with research sometimes, especially when we push for publication, can feel very satisfying to be validated by your peers within a given area, history or food science. But in order to really have the work that you do reach a broader public, there are different channels to do that. And that might be producing food for a general audience or for writing for the open web in a sense. So I think that's a really wonderful approach to take, Sammy, and I'm sure it's going to reach more people that way. So I applaud you for taking that approach. We've had a really rich discussion today. Given that we're two panelists, I want to propose that I actually conclude, in the spirit of knowing when to wrap things up, I want to propose that we conclude our talk so that I can invite everyone to do what they need, depending on where you are, get a sip of tea or get a snack. There are also some really interesting other opportunities that are simultaneously happening. One is we've got about 5 minutes left of a poster session that you can jump back to the reception or the sessions area and navigate to. And there's also a continuous networking opportunity, which is really quite fun. If you go to the networking tab, you'll basically be paired with someone randomly and you can meet someone new and sort of chat with them. So I encourage people to explore that as well. But for the moment, let me just ask all of our attendees, and it's been a good, we've had a wonderful collection of people here. I see a number of other student presenters who have joined us, who will be presenting later on today. Why don't we give a little round of applause to our presenters. Thank you so much to Alyssa and to Sammy for all of your hard work. We are so proud of you and happy to recognize the fruits of your labor today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to wrap things up and set everyone free to explore. Have fun today.